And hello, everyone. Sorry, we're starting a few minutes late. We have a little bit of a technical difficulty. Our guest is having problems signing in. So we're going to have to stall for a little bit until she signs in. So I do apologize, particularly to those of you who might be watching this later after the live. You could just kind of fast forward until you see another face show up on the screen. So I apologize that we've got a little bit of technical difficulty, but figured we'd come in. See, a bunch of you have already joined in to the chat. Hope you're looking forward to a great DuoDive tonight on rhinestone jewelry. So I've got Katie, of course, is with me. So Katie from Vintage and Rhinestone, and she is wearing one of the blingiest pieces of rhinestone jewelry I have seen. So go ahead and say, hey, Katie, and let's just show off what you got there.
Absolutely, Patrick. Hi, folks. I'm so glad to be joining in on the second episode of DuoDive. Very excited to be a part of this show. And tonight I am wearing a very, very special brooch. This was a gift from LJ from the chats. And this is a prong set rhinestone beauty. Now, this one is not marked on the back. However, I do think that this might be an undercover Weiss brooch. And I've talked about this a little bit, but Weiss brooches are very smooth on the back. I don't know if you can see how smooth that is, but that metal is really smooth, and they were known for making a lot of crystal brooches, and not all of them were marked. So I really do believe this has the quality of Weiss. Of course, it could be an Austrian crystal brooch as well, but it's just gorgeous. It's got the prong set. You've got some beautiful teardrop stones on the end, some marquisette stones in the middle with the round rhinestones. It's just a real stunner. So thanks, LJ. I love it. And this is really a fun little brooch to wear, especially in honor of the DuoDive tonight, which is all on rhinestone jewelry.
Now, you picked the largest rhinestone that you have. So do you have a lot of rhinestones in your collection, or is that something? I know you showed a lot of your brooches. Do you just buy the ones you like, or do you have a lot of rhinestones in your collection?
I have a lot of rhinestone brooches. I'm really drawn to these clear crystal brooches, especially the Weiss ones, because Weiss is just such high quality and it's going to retain its value. So I always am on the hunt for those. And I just find that they're just so pretty and they match everything, which is kind of fun. So I really do like these clear crystal.
And what era is the Weiss? What era are the Weiss brooches again?
So the Weiss brooches were around for a while, but not particularly too long. So they were around, I believe, from 1930 to 1950. I have to go back and get the specific dates, but Weiss was around a pretty short time, and they didn't make as many brooches as other companies did. So when you find a Weiss brooch, they're pretty special. Yes, I believe, 1930 through 1950. Of course, Weiss was had some trouble, and they ended up not being around. So unfortunately, they did close down like some of the other fine jewelry makers of their day. But I love Weiss, and they're just great quality pieces. Of course, there are a lot of fake Weiss out there. You have to watch out for that. If you see a lot of Weiss brooches that have kind of an antique finish on the back, or they have bumps in the metal and they're not particularly smooth, they still could be marked Weiss, but they're probably actually not Weiss. There's a lot of fakes out there, so you got to be cautious with that. So always look for the shiny metal back, the Weiss in the circle, and the prong set rhinestones with really good clarity, and you know you've got a true Weiss brooch.
So we've got Nancy is in the chat. At least she's saying that she's having problems with her browser. So hopefully she could get those reset. Now, you said that the one that you have you thought might be Weiss, but it wasn't marked. Is that a thing? Like, were there ones that were released that were not marked?
Yes, there's actually quite a few Weiss pieces that are not marked Weiss. Now, why they didn't mark them Weiss, I don't know. But there's a fascinating article by a jewelry expert that I found on a jewelry website that just deals in different marks and dating brooches. It's a very helpful website. And they talked about how there's a lot of quote unquote undercover Weiss brooches that are not marked Weiss, but actually are Weiss. And they talked about some of the qualities of those pieces. And this one, if I can take it off here, I can show you what I mean by the back. It's just so well done. You can see how shiny that metal is. It's very smooth. And I think Pam had one of these on her live the other day. And what was the term she was using? Was it puddling? I think I'm not familiar with that term, but I am now because of Pam, and I got to do some more research on it. You can just see how well that is done. It's very smooth. And then each crystal is prong set. So it's got some really good quality to it. Now the prongs here are a little bit thicker, which usually is a sign of Austrian crystal brooches. So this very well could be an Austrian piece, but I do think that it's got the quality to be Weiss. So this could be one of those undercover Weiss pieces that just isn't marked. But man, this is a gorgeous piece. And it's a pretty big brooch. It measures about 3 inches in length. So it's pretty stunning.
And I'm sorry, what was the puddling again?
Yes, puddling. So on the back, you'll see how the metal is really smooth and kind of comes together. That's, I believe, called puddling. Pam was talking about that recently on one of the Weiss brooches she had.
So it's how those individual backings are attached to each other?
Yes, and the way the metal is.
The
like
metal,
how smooth the metal is and how it forms together. I believe that's the correct term, but this definitely has the mark of that. And I really love these little teardrop stones. I think they're beautiful. And then you've got all of the circles here, which just really good clarity. I mean, you can see right through those crystals. Just stunning.
Well, that's definitely one of the things I will share. And it looks like Nancy's just getting herself set in. Yours has the individual stones with the individual backings. I pilfered this from my daughter's collection. I'll show you the front first. So this is one that she left behind before she left for grad school. So the stones are prong set, but unlike yours, the back is all solid. And so this was one I kind of pulled out so that when Nancy gets into talking about her collection, as we identify, is how do you know whether something's modern versus vintage? And then this is an unmarked piece. It is a little bit tarnished, so I do think that it might be silver plate or sterling, but it's not even marked sterling. But this has a totally different back than yours because it's all completely closed in. But it does look like Nancy is now set up. So I can bring Nancy into the chat. And so here we're giving Nancy like fair warning that she's about to go live. So here we go. And there she is. Nancy.
Well, home from Scouts, out of the uniform, all set up, and trying not to run over my cat's tail with my chair.
No, that's okay. You get me and Katie into a room. We can fill time. So we got all kinds.
Absolutely.
So we were just discussing before you logged on. We were just discussing puddling. So we've covered that. And Lucinda added a comment on that, clarifying between the rhinestones on the back. So yeah, so that's a term I was not familiar with. And
yeah, that's not one I knew either.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so we're
learning a new one.
Learn from each other.
Yes.
So we've got Nancy tonight from This Overstuffed House. If you're not familiar with Nancy, she also has been doing some live sales. Her very first live sale was actually on my channel, and she now has her live sales on Thursday nights after my live sales are over at 11 p.m. Eastern. So she is covering the night shift with her live sales. And Nancy had some medical concerns or medical issues that put her bedridden for a while. And she did one of the most interesting, if you're not following her channel, make sure you follow This Overstuffed House, all one word. She did one of the most interesting videos I'd ever seen. And it was showcasing her rhinestone jewelry collection while she was flat on her back, just holding things up into the air.
Just doing this.
Okay, I'm not sure what I'm bringing out of the box, but let's see what this one is. She was just like winging it. And
I was totally winging that.
It was a fascinating collection. It was a fascinating. She's so knowledgeable in what she sells and obviously knowledgeable on what she has. So as Katie and I merged our deep dives and show and tells into the DuoDive, and we were continuing to fill slots, it was a perfect extension to offer to Nancy to come in and maybe give so she could see her own collection while she's talking about it, giving a Nancy 2.0 rhinestone presentation, kind of showcasing her collection and going into a little bit more detail on some of what she talked about in her show. So I do encourage you to follow This Overstuffed House. It was probably, what was that, like 2 months ago? 3 months ago?
I got her towards the end of May, so it would have been the beginning of June.
Okay, so
beginning of June, because I was still in bed rest at that point.
Okay, so you have to go back a couple of months to find an older video, and I can't remember what the thumbnail of it was. It might be a piece of rhinestone,
I'm pretty sure the thumbnail's a piece of rhinestone.
Yeah,
It
so-
might even be the tiara.
I don't
Might be
think
the
it
tiara.
was. I don't remember. I don't remember now.
I remember the tiara well from one
yeah,
of your
The tiara is
was
very
definitely
good
the
bait,
promotion.
isn't it?
So we will hopefully we'll see all that and even more tonight. So we do one question, and I just want to make sure we don't miss it. Katie mentioned a website earlier. So while Nancy's talking, if you can dig up that website, Katie, and drop it into the comments, and we will put it into the description of the video as well. The one for dating and identifying vintage.
Absolutely.
So we, on that note, we will then pass over to Nancy, and kind of, I know you mentioned a little bit in your video, kind of how you had built up that collection, but if you could just educate, let everyone know where did your collection come about? Why did you start collecting rhinestone jewelry?
So some of the collection came about because I grew up knowing 5 of the 9 of my great-grandparents' kids. I knew the oldest one, who was born in 1900, and then my grandmother was one of her younger sisters. So I knew the oldest and the youngest and a handful of them in between. And I was the only one that liked old stuff. My brothers didn't really care. There's a 16-year age spread between us from the oldest to me. And my sister is 14 years older than I am. Typical, had the poodle skirt, the bobby socks or shoes, the saddle shoes, all that. I grew up a tomboy, but I did like old stuff. And anytime an illness came through the house, I was born with a problem with my heart, which every female is, but I didn't grow out of mine. So I got sent away to a relative's house. Well, what better way to keep a young girl entertained than to let them root through your jewelry box? So I really had the fun of as I got older, they would just either give me a piece or they'd let me pick a piece. And then when Annie Floss passed away, one of the great aunts, she left me all the jewelry boxes in the house. Now, at that point, I did not realize that my great-grandfather was a jeweler. So I got all the rhinestone stuff that was in the house. I got some really other nice stuff that was in the house. I got rings, gold rings with no stones, stones with no settings, and of course they didn't match. So, but that's how I really started off with the collection, was from being with them so much. And then my grandmothers did the same thing, is they would let me play in their jewelry, and then as I got older would give me pieces. And then some pieces I found on my own over the years. And I've had fun.
How much of the collection, as you were building it up, or I guess when you were really, as you were growing up and you were growing with it, did they give you, and did you retain any information of like, where did it come from? Who was the maker, any of that? Or was it really like
a few pieces? Yes. But okay. A lot of what I have of the clear rhinestones is not marked. And they wouldn't necessarily tell me who made it, but they would tell me how they got it. Like it was a present from so-and-so, or it was a gift. And, this is what I got for Christmas, or I picked this out for myself. And so some of them, I have the history of how they got it, but not necessarily who made it.
Okay. Now, one of the questions we can probably start out with, because you've referenced it a couple of times and you are talking about maybe an older collection, what would make something specifically a rhinestone versus a glass costume jewelry or paste?
From what I have read about in some of the books, that seems to be a debate that's gone on for a long time. Is the general overall term is rhinestone, but then you have paste or you have crystal. And paste is just basic glass. And it will, and I have a piece here that's not particularly old. This necklace piece has this wonderful little thing. These little pearls are plastic, but the stone is glass. And if you look at one of the reasons I picked this one is, and unfortunately this phone doesn't like to do close up that well. Let's see if this will help. You see that gold in the center there? That's foil on the back of the glass. They would paint a gold, or usually a gold, but sometimes a silver color foil on the back. And then they would have a colored glass piece in the front. And that foil acts as a reflective to give it depth and a little bit of sparkle inside the piece of glass. Now, crystals don't need that. Crystals usually, just because they're crystal, have their own way of reflecting light. And one thing you'll notice differently between what they would call paste, which would be the pin and the necklace here, is the fact that with a crystal, it really, like, the shine difference is very, very noticeable. And I've seen some people just refer to rhinestone as either just being all crystal, and then this would be considered costume because it's glass, it's what they call paste, as opposed to actual crystals.
Now, I don't want to get too hung up on semantics, but it's what I do. So you said paste is basically glass.
Yeah.
Is it glass, or is it a type of glass?
Well, it's a type of glass,
Okay.
but I'm not exactly sure the difference of how they do it. Like the older vintage pieces, I'm not quite sure what the difference is, because some of them, when you handle them, the weight is very different in some, and I don't understand why. The older pieces have real weight to the glass, but they're not crystal. Like this one, this has some weight to it, but it's just a simple bar pin, and if it'll come out. This one doesn't always like to come out. This actually, I was told, was meant to go on your hat, and you could stick this through the hat and catch part of your hair through that. And it's like a stick pin going into this part, but it's just two great big topaz. But you can see on the backs, there is some damage along here where the foil is coming off. And where that foil comes off, you could tell that these are actually clear. These are actually clear glass. All that color is from the backing.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Katie is now planning her next collection. Vintage hat bars, but okay. Now,
yes, Terry, you're right. It is a stubby weapon.
I was listening to, if anyone does podcasts, I highly recommend Antiques Freaks podcast. They do the equivalent of audio deep dives. Unfortunately, you don't get to go along with it. And they did a rhinestone episode not that long ago. And one of the things they talked about is that the paste, the glass, is some of the more valuable pieces because it was so hard to facet. The glass, like crystal or stones can be faceted, but glass is not. But you want it to look like a stone, so it was a very difficult skill to replicate. So, but I don't come across them often enough to be able to see, at a glance, okay, is this glass? And I never would have thought that stone that you just showed was clear. I would have absolutely assumed it was a colored stone.
Yeah. And I don't know how far back having that foil stuff on the back started. But this is an older pin, and all the metal work on it is very nicely done. But you can see where everything's hand soldered on there, because actually somebody must have burnt their finger, because you can't see it because it's too tiny. But there's part of a fingerprint on the soldering right here. So somebody hurt themselves.
Yikes.
And that's one of the ones I got from my great aunts, that particular pin.
Are the oldest pieces that you have, are they primarily your family pieces, or have you picked up any older ones since then?
Most of the oldest ones are from the family, except that the tiara and this one, which is actually the one I picked this one up, and this is the one that's the cover shot for the video that I did about my jewelry before. And this one is, I have not been able to match the stone to replace the one missing here yet. But this one, I try to be careful with. It's really nice. It's prong set. The green they are green stones, but it's very soft metal that this is set in. So I honestly wonder if it's not set in lead, but it's missing the piece. It's missing the connector, and you can tell when you see it up close that this is the kind of clasp that curls over and locks, but you can see the soldering. This is not the original clasp piece.
Oh, interesting.
So that was, yeah. And I picked this one up out of a little junk box at a yard sale for 50 cents.
Oh, wow.
But
Now,
it's
that
definitely older.
The back on that one, it's open, right? So there's no foil behind it.
Everything is open.
So those
that
must be crystals or stones.
Yes.
Okay.
These are, and see, they just catch the light, and it's kind of dusty from being in the box, but even with that, you can see how it just reflects light so well.
Okay. And now Pat Robinson's also on the Semantic Police. So
cuter.
As we define rhinestone, is a rhinestone colloquially referring to both glass or crystal, or is a rhinestone only the glass?
Now, see, when I was growing up, they just referred to rhinestone as both. That it was a style of, as opposed to being like real emeralds.
From the podcast, I did pick up some stuff from the podcast. So in somewhat, I can't say it's a definitive answer for Pat, but I do think a lot of it crosses over. But if you have 19th century pieces that are true rhinestones, they would be the glass with the foil back. And that those, because this was the reference that they were talking about the faceting, they were so hard to create what looked like a faceted stone. They're exceptionally valuable. And anyone that actually has true 19th century glass rhinestones would be very offended if you called them costume jewelry, because it was never, and that was the other thing that I kind of debunked in the podcast, is that this was never like poor man's jewelry. Like some of these were incredibly expensive because of the cost to facet glass. It just doesn't do it. So it was very expensive at the time. And so there is a differential, but it sounds like, so Nancy, from your perspective, you're kind of collecting across the spectrum, whether it's crystal. Now, do you have an era that you're focusing on? Because obviously most of us are going to come across is probably more contemporary stuff.
Yeah, most of the stuff you're going to come across is going to be more contemporary, and I've seen this now. I can't remember the maker name. Hang on a second. Where'd I just put that loop? Because it's only on the pin. It's not on the earrings. Oh, I hate when they do that. There's so much rhodium plating over the name. And I saw this in a book too. I think this was actually a Sarah Coventry piece. But let me tell you something about this. There's another one out there that looks almost exactly like it. And then this is the clip earrings. Okay, yeah, the clip earring says Sarah Cove. So this is the Sarah Coventry piece that's from the 60s. There is another version that I came across in one of the price guides that is a little bigger. And all these black stones actually come all the way around here in that book. Wow. And that was from one of the older companies that put it out in the 40s. And now, the company in the 40s has a matching necklace.
Now, if I remember when you showed this in your video, the difference with this one is that the black were prong set, but the clear are glued. Can you talk a little bit more about the difference between the settings?
Yeah, it's really odd. And the prongs they used aren't like, where's a good example that might show up well on this? So the bird has good prongs. Okay, so can you see how big the prongs are holding this centerpiece? A prong set is the prongs actually come up over the edge of the stone. Whatever the stone is, doesn't matter. It's the prong actually holds it in place. It's not glued in, it's set in, and then they put these, now this one happens to have four big prongs on it, holding that piece in. But these the prongs are small. They're little balls, but they do come up over the edge of the black stones. But all of the clear rhinestones, these are all glued in. They just glued those in. It's going to try to focus on mine.
Now, the glued-in rhinestones typically aren't as good a quality as the prong set. Is that correct, Nancy?
That's been what I've found. I've found that when I've had problems with things discoloring because of whatever happens in the back, it's usually ones that are not prong set.
Now, from a functional standpoint, though, because of the foil backing, how are they glued against the foil without messing up the reflection? Or are these now crystals that are glued?
With these, I'm not sure, because Sarah Coventry for a long time was using clear crystals, but then the glass, like the black glass on here, is just glass. They would use colored glass for all of their colored stones by the time they were doing stuff in the 60s.
Okay.
Yeah, who typically
my mother used to sell Sarah and Coventry in the 60s, which is how I got these.
Now, who usually makes the crystals? I've heard that Austrian crystals are better than just regular crystals. What are you finding, Nancy?
The best ones seem to be the, how do you pronounce it? Swarovski?
Oh, yes. Okay.
I think that's the one, that's the crystal that everybody seems to look for. They seem to have the better quality, the best shine. If they're meant to have a certain iridescence to them, they tend to have that as well. One of the problems of not having things that are, most of them that are marked, is that I don't necessarily know how many of these might be Swarovski, because I don't have too many things that are marked. I do have one thing that is actually in the original box. So I have a Trifari. That's, if you see a jewelry box with that little symbol on the box at a yard sale or anything, that is Trifari, because this one is still in the original box. And it's another little clear one with clear crystals to it, but they were using Swarovski crystals for quite a long time. Is Trifari still, when did Trifari stop? Because they seem to have gone on for quite a long time.
Late 80s.
What was that, Katie?
I believe Trifari stopped in the late 80s, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe 90s. But they were probably around, one of the longest companies to be around.
Yeah, they I know were around for a very long time. I hear Louie.
And Louie loves the rhinestones. She's excited.
Well, and there's another
and is that piece Nancy Trifari, or is it Crown Trifari? Do you know?
I think it just says Jewels by Trifari. However, it does have the crown over the T, which I think makes it Crown Trifari, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes it Crown Trifari.
Which I think was the later mark they used.
Trifari had several different marks. In the 20s, they used KTF. And then I believe in the 30s, they started Crown Trifari. And then Trifari just came around in the 50s, I believe.
Okay.
Right.
Now, one of the questions that came in the chat, I did answer it. Swarovski started in 1895. And then as a related question, Picasso Cat was asking about Aurora Borealis. And I know from listening to the podcast that Swarovski invented Aurora Borealis in 1955. So now, do you have any Borealis stones?
Is that when they have that kind of blue rainbow kind of
rainbow effect? Not just the blue, but
not just the blue. Stones. Yeah, I don't think you guys are going to be able to catch the rainbow effect that's going on this one. Because this one has that.
Okay, I've only seen.
And then I have this one.
Colors. Okay.
This one also has the rainbow effect, and these are clear.
Yeah.
That's what I'm used to when
that's what
I
I
hear
mean.
Aurora Borealis.
Yeah, usually it's a clear one, but I have come across blue ones every once in a while where it's a lighter blue stone, but the refraction makes it look darker than it really is.
Okay.
And I always wondered, how did they do that? Because this is a neat bracelet, but again, this is not one. It has a really nice, they really did a nice job with the back in that it has all that plating on all of the chain. But this is, while they cheated, they tried to make it look like it's prong set. There are two little posts sticking up on either side, but they don't actually go over the edge of the crystal. And I had this one cleaned once and two of the crystals put back in. They definitely are crystals, but they are not prong set, surprisingly. So it's probably a more modern piece, but it's still a beauty. It really is still quite a nice one. One of the things,
I'm sorry, Peters had added a quick note because evidently she designs jewelry and I wanted to show it up because of a reference. So Aurora Borealis is a finish it's a coating that they put on the stone that gives it
all
that
colors.
difference. And she's saying there is available in other colors. So I had not seen that. That was iridescence, but I guess it's that technical. The Borealis is available in different colored stones. That's good to know.
Now, one thing I do know that you can tell when you get something that, so some things on the surface may look like they're pretty good. This one has the nice gold to it, or seems to, like the back of that bracelet that I just showed, how it reflects. It looks almost like like a rhodium back has that thick metallic coating. And sometimes you'll see things like this where they've done that same kind of coating to make it smooth, and it's in black. I mean, it's in gold, but this is another, it was a set of two, but I've got one, my sister has the other. But when you feel some of these pieces, that you can tell the quality, because while it looks good, if you just rub your finger over the edges that are straight lines, it's really rough on this bottom edge. It's really rough across here. Now, it does have little lines for the feathers, so you would expect this top edge to be rough, but not there, not down here. It looks like it would be smooth, but it's not, and it bends very easily. You have to be really careful with this one, because I've accidentally bent the tail more than once. Because I think what they did, and my grandmother got matching ones for my sister and I in the, in the early 70s. She got these, but they really weren't the greatest quality, because the metal inside, while it looks really good, is really, really soft. So I think it's a lead base, but it's also the fact that the plating is inconsistent. It's not that smoothness, because the bracelet, like I said, and even this one has it too. It has a rhodium back where there's no rough edges, because the way it's all over the back of it, which that might be part of that puddling idea. But the way it covers all the metal pieces and gives it this wonderful shine, it also makes every edge smooth. And I found that you can really tell some of the lesser quality pieces by the fact that you'll find rough edges that aren't smooth when you run your fingertip over them. Some things you find, I know there are people who just collect things that are jelly bellies, which I don't know if the bird falls into that category. But there'll be an animal of some kind, and it'll just have one large stone to it. Now, this one happens to be much older. He had enamel work on the feathers. He's lost most of his rhinestones. He's got one blue one there and a little red one for the eye. But he's an older piece. And he's also a base metal, because this is supposed to be the rest of the branch, and that that bends, it got bent down once, and I'm afraid to bend it back out because I'm afraid it'll snap off. And he's got the kind of clasp that it doesn't have any safety to it. It's just this little hook, and you have to get this long pin underneath that hook and not stab yourself when it comes off and you try to grab it, because it's going to fall off your coat. But I have two. I know some people that collect just the kind of pins that have a single large stone in them. And I happen to have two like that, just because I picked them up because I liked them. This one was one of the ones that was supposedly my great-grandmother's. And then this one I bought at some point. I think this one is another yard sale find.
So the pin that was your great-grandmother's, I'm noticing that it has just a C clasp on the back as opposed to a safety.
Yeah, it does not have a safety clasp. Yeah, I believe it does. I believe that one does.
Do you know when they switched to using safety clasps? I know that they did it so that it's not to protect yourself from stabbing yourself, but so that you wouldn't lose your expensive jewelry off of your shirt or your dress.
True, because some of these would have been expensive. This is one that I inherited, and it's set in sterling, and I've never had the stones checked, but it's just it's very thin. It's a little crown. I just lost my white paper, but it's a little crown, and you can just see, it keeps wanting to focus on my fingers. But there's little stones all the way down to the bottom. And I need to get this one checked, because I was surprised at one thing. It does have that same kind of just a C clasp that you hook over, but even the pin part tarnishes just like the rest of it. So when you polish it up, it polishes just like the rest of it. So I don't know, maybe the point is also, the actual pin part might be silver as well, because it's a simple hinge. There's a pin through this hinge that you can actually see, that they had made a pin to go from one side, which is smooth, and then through this to this side. And you can see where the jeweler would have cut it off and then hammered it flat on this side. So this is a lovely little handcrafted piece. And I don't know if it's one that my great-grandfather made, but I know it was one that was from my great-grandmother.
That's gorgeous. Now, the stones that are running down the center of that, are those prong set? They're so small.
They have the tiniest little prongs you could ever imagine.
Okay.
They are all prong set. It's just amazing to me how tiny the prongs are on this thing.
That must have been a lot of work.
Yeah, it had to have been. And I really wonder if this was, I've never had the stones checked, but I really think I should, because I still have the watch, the wristwatch that my great-grandfather made as the wedding gift for my great-grandmother. And it's all done in white gold.
That's amazing.
And this is all done in sterling. So I need to get those stones checked.
As an era question, Julie has a question, but I would say, this is just my opinion, that to me looks very early Edwardian, because it's that linear look, but it still is over from the Victorian with that crown. Yes. So it's like, it's not just a bar pin, it's got kind of that combo. So that would make it really early 1900s. And Julie is asking, with that C clasp, does that automatically mean it is older? And so I think Katie had mentioned that a little bit earlier, and I just it's worth highlighting, because I'm trying to remember when Katie did one of her videos, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, that if it has the C clasp, it definitely indicates that it's older. But if it has a safety clasp, that does not mean that it's newer, because the safety clasp one has been around for a long time, but also a lot of old brooches got reset or the backing was reattached. So it could still be a 100-year-old brooch, but they put a new backing on it because they wanted to protect it. So, so I would say if you see the C, that's not off. They don't do that anymore. So like, that's correct though, right? If you see the C, by definition, that makes it old.
Yes, usually, because they do not make them that way anymore.
Now, I do want to point out there are a few cheaper companies out on the market now that are kind of reinventing the C clasp just because it saves cost. And you'll typically find them with cheap pins that you can buy at Claire's and other places, but it's easy to tell that those are modern.
It is.
And Peterson also has a tip that I've heard about the length of the pin going past the clasp, which I think on the first piece that you showed, the peacock, that I think if that pin were straightened out, I think it would stick out a lot further. So
yeah, it probably would, because there is a little bit of a curve.
Yeah, so it's kind of shortened a little bit. Yep. So that's also a trick, that if it sticks out a lot further, because it kind of goes back into the thing, you would actually be able to poke that further into your clothes to keep it from falling off. So they didn't care about you stabbing yourself. So that's a neat little trick too, as you're getting into. I don't know when that stopped. Probably stopped after they got rid of the C clasps, but yeah, that's another nice trick to be able to show.
That's a good point. That once they have the C clasp, looking at the pins that I have that have a C clasp, you're right. They are all just a bit shorter. All of the actual pin part. Whereas the older ones, the older one is longer.
And there's a couple of, obviously there's always going to be exceptions to every rule. So Daniel and Mayberry are sharing, exceptions. It's never, it's kind of combining all of the factors you can build as you go. And dating something that's not stamped is one of the hardest things, and then you just hope that you're not finding someone who's actively trying to deceive you. Because the other piece that's worth always paying attention to with that length issue is you also have to check to make sure that the end of it is still pointy, because at some point they got broken off, by accident. So if you suddenly feel a blunt end, it may have stuck out another 2 or 3 centimeters, but now it doesn't because it got snapped off. So, it's tough, and it's fascinating, and having them in your hand, even seeing them on YouTube, it's harder to see the detail. Getting them into your hands and start feeling those weights. And I wanted to circle back because I had muted myself and you couldn't hear me. You had showed that pin that had the feather end that you said was easy to bend. You had shown in your video one, it was a larger stone. I want to say it was a pendant that ended up all being plastic. And I was curious, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about how to tell between the glass, crystal, and then even when you're getting into the plastic, are there easy ways to tell?
Well, one thing with glass is that it'll be cold. It gets cold very quickly, and you'll tell the difference because plastic does not get that cold. In the summertime, plastic will be whatever room temperature it is, but sometimes a lot of times glass will still be a little colder to the touch. But the weight is a big thing, because you can usually tell. I mean, this thing has some weight with those 2 big stones on there, but then a plastic piece that size wouldn't necessarily have that same weight. I don't think I have that piece.
And I've seen plastic rhinestones that are painted, and so sometimes you can see the paint flaking off just a little bit.
Yeah,
and that's a great thing to look for with the plastic stones.
And that's fine. That's fine, Nancy. We didn't kind of go over what we were going to ask about. I was just
well, I was looking for an example because, here's a good example. So these have some nice little rhinestones going around at the top, but the necklace itself has no weight. There's nothing to that bead. I think it's a 1950s acrylic, like maybe a lucite, but if that were glass, there would be some real weight to that thing, and there's like nothing.
Okay.
The metal top weighs more than the big bead does.
Oh, that's a good tip.
So once you get used to handling them, you can sometimes tell once you're used to it to notice it just by picking a piece up. If the biggest, and usually what happens, it is the biggest stone there is the plastic one, because they're decreasing the weight. And if it were having to be a faceted stone, that would be a high cost if it were a true stone, as opposed to, or a true crystal, as opposed to a piece of plastic.
True. Now
We've
talked a couple of times, like the top of that earring and some of the other, how it's been set in the metal or in the setting. Book has a question regarding things that are set into sterling. So she's specifically talking about cameos, glass cameos. But as you get into, which I guess would that be more like an intaglio cut? That'd probably be cut glass. But for any of the jewelry that we would come across, is there anything about the type of setting that would help indicate age? Like, was sterling more common in a certain era? Was sterling common at all in the 50s and 60s? Like, what was the triggers?
I'm trying to think, because there were some sterling makers, and there isn't. When you find the rhinestone video, there's a second one that shows the actual like good stuff that's sterling. And I did the other jewelry box. There had been sterling stuff that I have up through the 50s, but after that, it started disappearing. In that most of the stuff that the relatives all had, or even that I found, wasn't made out of a sterling setting. And I have quite a few. I mean, I actually just grabbed this one because it had been on my nightstand because I had worn it somewhere. And because this one is usually in the other box because it is sterling. And I noticed that the sterling, you do see more sterling probably from what I have in my collection, from the Edwardian period up to and through the 50s. And then it seems to start getting less and less. I do have a cat pin that very much has that mid-century modern kind of art look to it, that is just a silhouette of the cat, and then there's a way that the eye is cut out. And I'm pretty sure that's in that other video. And that's all sterling, but that's probably the newest looking piece I have of the vintage jewelry. And that one was a gift to Annie Floss in the 50s when she got promoted to supervisor at Bell-Tel. Good old Ma Bell. But that was back in the day when you had to have the switchboard operator that had to plug the thing in to connect the calls. And she had worked there for years and had finally been up to supervisor status. And the girls that she worked with gave her that as a gift. And that was lovely. Sometime in the mid-50s.
Now, do you find any correlation to, particularly with the sterling, like you said, up until the 50s? I know that when you get into true antique jewelry, not even just talking about rhinestones, just talking about anything, that diamonds, things like that, you typically aren't going to find those set in silver. Those are going to be set higher quality. When you're dealing with the difference between crystal and glass, would glass ever be set in a sterling or in anything heavier or any sort of gold? Or is that an indication of
that's usually from what I've seen? That was out of my price range. It's usually crystal that's set in the sterling and gold.
Okay.
That's usually really nice crystals. I've not come across anything that's really been, I've never come across anything that I have seen would have been glass that was set in gold. And I'm trying hard to think if I've come across anything silver that had just glass in it, and I can't think of any that I've seen that I knew was absolutely glass. But I've seen an awful lot of beautiful crystals set in sterling.
Now, I was reading an interesting article the other day, and they talked about how in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, gold was really, really big. So a lot of costume jewelry featured gold, and they didn't have as much silver tone then as we might see now, which I thought was interesting.
A gold finish, or was actually made from gold?
No, gold finish, like
Okay.
Gold finish
jewelry.
You'll see a lot of things from there marked GF. And it'll say like 12K or 14K GF. And that's gold filled.
Which I've never understood what that meant. Is that just plated?
Pretty much.
Okay.
I mean, it basically means it has an outer shell of gold, but it's actually over top of some other base metal.
Okay.
So that, they didn't. Plated had a lower, I guess plated because of plated silver. I guess they felt that saying gold plated was a lower class connotation. So they started for a long while there saying gold filled.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, right, very interesting.
That was worth highlighting with book. So hers is glass in sterling, but it's glass cameos. So they're cut glass. So I would say those are higher quality glass anyway. So that's a big surprise to be in sterling. But for the plain stones, my big fear is exactly what you showed with the one necklace in your other video. Is, you know, again, on appearance, that looked like a beautiful glass or crystal stone. It looked like a, you know, gold tone setting, and then you're like, yep, whole thing's plastic. Like, yeah, that's me. I tend not to pick up a lot of it because I don't know what I'm picking up. And right before you jumped on, I was showing one of the pieces I stole out of my daughter's collection. And so just based on some of the things you just said, so these are prong set. We've got the clear, and we've got the blue. Now it's not marked, and it has a closed back, so it doesn't have the puddling thing we were talking about, and it is turnishing. So
I was gonna say, is that set in silver? Because it sure looks like it.
Yeah, it's definitely tarnishing. So it's either silver plate or it's sterling, and it's not even marked for that. So based on what you are saying, that because it is at least some level of silver, these probably are stones as opposed to, or at least these are probably crystal as opposed to glass. And they are prong set.
Quite possibly. Now, when you find older pieces that are more towards, pre-World War I, you will find red stones that are actually garnets. And they will look ruby red. Because a lot of the garnets pre-World War I came out of Czechoslovakia, and they have a wonderful deep red color. And then, but by the time you got to World War II, the mines for there were getting played out, and they were getting lighter and lighter colors of stones. I know because there had been a brooch that was a little bit bigger than this one, that had been nothing but garnets, and it had been my great-great-grandmother's, and my great-grandfather broke it apart. They had lost the center stone or sold it during the Great Depression, I don't know which, but he took it apart and made 5 rings for 5 daughters. I have 2 of the rings because he designed a ring for each daughter. And I have the one from Annie Floss, who's my great aunt. And then I have the one that was from my grandmother, which was her sister. So I have 2 of the 5 rings that had been broken out. And it had all been, they had all been from Czechoslovakia, the garnets. That's where the brooch had been from. And, somewhere there's an old derogatype. I can never say that word right. Somewhere there's one of those old cabinet photos of her wearing wearing the brooch. And then so now I have a photo that actually showed the original brooch on somebody. And so that was kind of cool to know that history. I have to decide what I'm going to do since I have 2 and I don't have any daughters. So I have to decide what's happening there.
What were you going to say, Katie?
Now, going back to the glass brooches with the paper on the back, storing those must be a concern because I'm sure you don't want those to get scratched. So what is the best way to store those? Do you have to be really cautious with some of these pieces?
You should. I don't have mine stored as nicely as I would like to because the box isn't big enough. The box they're in is not big enough. But what I do have is I have taken quilt batting and cut a layer that is the right size for the box. And I'll put a layer on the bottom of the box of that, so that then the pins are stored open so that I can push the pin part into that batting so they don't slide around. And then I'll put another layer. Once I fill that with jewelry, then I'll put another layer and then another layer of jewelry. It gets a little compressed though, because I didn't do that with the tray. And the tray has all the earrings, mostly all the earrings in it. Because if I put it in with the tray, then everything is pressing up against the lid of the box. And I don't want anything to really get squished flat, you know, because now I do know there are some things you do want to try to not have these things get scratched up. If you have something that actually has a real opal in it, you never want the opal to be face down because it's a soft stone, it's a soft gemstone. It will flatten out on you, as I found out with a pair of earrings. Oops. So you do want to be careful with some of this stuff. And then things like this, he goes into a special little paper envelope when he's not being shown, because I don't want anything to take that enamel paint off. It's already got a few spots where there's wear, you know, especially on the tip of this wing. He's losing the tip of this one. They're losing their blue and their pink. And because I don't want any more damage to happen to him, this one lives in its own little paper bag inside the box, so nothing else can scratch it.
Those are great tips, Nancy.
Absolutely. And related to the storing is then also the cleaning. And All in the Attic Treasures threw some comments up, but specifically she ends up talking about tarnishing. Do you have any tips, or when you're cleaning the jewelry, do you have any suggestions or things that we should look for or not look at?
Well, never, ever, ever submerge it in water.
I was just going to say the same thing. Pamela 13 is throwing, you have to know whether it is foil backed or not. Because if that foil back ever gets wet, that's what starts to tarnish, and then your stones start looking dark.
Yeah, you can end up with dead stones, which is a term of when I don't think I've got any. But when a discoloration happens because that backing has gotten moisture behind it, and it'll darken a clear stone. And so just won't have the shine. It'll actually look a bit gray, and that you don't ever want that. And you also don't want them falling out. If they're glued in, that's not a good thing for the glue either, if you submerge them. And if you end up, if anything, go find the softest toothbrush you can. I know one gentleman that I used to know who had the most stunning. Why do the drag queens have all the fantastic jewelry? So, but he had the most stunning collection of Monet jewelry. I don't think there was a piece they made he didn't own. And he would use a baby's hairbrush to dust his pieces off, because it was so fine and so soft that he never had to worry about it scratching anything. And he would use a Q-tip with rubbing alcohol and hold the pieces upside down so that nothing would ever drip, because you didn't want the Q-tip to be soaking wet. But he wasn't going to take the chance that anything would drip inside and in between all the stones. And he would just carefully wipe them off with that, and then he would use a hairdryer. He would set the hairdryer on warm and blow dry them to make sure that no moisture at any point stayed on his stuff. And they were all stunning pieces.
And that was exactly what I was going to throw in from the podcast is that, in some cases, particularly if you're thrifting them or finding them in less palatable situations, they may need legitimately to be cleaned. So sometimes you might have to use moisture, but then have the hairdryer available to make sure that thing gets coated out so that the foil backing never gets wet.
This thing is due for a cleaning again. But let me tell you what a bugger it is to clean something this size when every single stone you see has at least 4 prongs holding it in.
Wow.
That is gorgeous.
Yeah, there's no maker's
spectacular.
name. Check this out. It's adjustable. This actually expands and contracts, and it has these loops so that you can actually put bobby pins through, hairpins through the loop to hold it onto your head. And there's not a bit of plastic on this. This is all metal and rhinestones.
Gorgeous.
And there's no, this is the back of it. Look, I mean, you can see how well they put together every little piece. Even the stars have this nice backing to give the star, but then they left the center open to let light through. And I found this, oh geez, 20, were we even into the year 2000 yet?
You're being requested to put it on.
My kid was Michael was born, so it was after 94, but the internet and eBay hadn't come out yet. And I got this for $42 back then.
Wow.
And I can't imagine what it's worth now. And I've never found a maker. Even the gold edge has a pattern on the metal all the way around. And I've rented it out 3 times. One to a local opera company that was doing Midsummer Night's Dream because, you know, the Fairy Queen needs his crown. And then 2 Gilbert and Sullivan groups have done Iolanthe, and you'd have a Fairy Queen in there. And you know what? There's a dead stone. Look. See how dark that one is?
Yeah. That
one is what is a dead stone. Because it's not matching. See how nice and bright this that's the dark one.
Great,
but then you've got this one.
Jamie's
example.
requesting you put it on.
Well, you know, the one thing that's a difficulty is it's a perfect circle, and nobody's head is a perfect circle.
There you go.
Oh boy, that is fabulous.
I've never had it on without a wig. Because it does need to just kind of sit up on your head. So I've never had it on without a wig on. Because it's a
great piece to end on. Although I do have one question. Polly's Projects came in with a question. I wanted to end with your tiara, but I think this is a valid question I wanted to ask because we did not touch on this, Polly, because Paula just joined in. It's talking about when we're getting into the costume or the rhinestone jewelry, moving into the stuff that would glow. So is there an era? Are there certain types of tone? I've seen it, you know, on.
I've seen it rarely. And after seeing that, I never thought to check my stuff for glow. And I was so disappointed when none of it did. It happened. Who was it? Was it Jan at Antiques from Karen? And she put it on something piece of jewelry glowed. And I'm sitting there going, jewelry can glow? Wait a minute, where's my black light? And I was just so disappointed because of all the stuff I've got. Nothing glowed.
I have only 2 brooches that actually glow, but it was pretty amazing because I saw someone talking about it on YouTube, and I never had made that connection. And I went with my black light immediately back to my jewelry cases. It was like a kid in a candy shop, and I saw those 2, and I'm like, wow. But I did want to mention a little bit about the cleaning. I know we're wrapping up here, but I talked about Haggerty's silver foam in the chat. That is recommended by Nate in New Zealand, and he's a big fan of that. And he cleans some special pieces of silver jewelry with that as well. But you can also take jewelry to any jewelry store, and a high-quality jewelry store will clean things for you. In fact, our jewelry store does it for free. If you bring in your rings or earrings, something small, they can just take it right in the back and do some really good, high-quality, safe cleaning.
Safe cleaning being the key word, because you'll see a lot of do-it-yourself things. The only one I've used, and I've never used it on jewelry, but I've used it on other things, like I have my mother's baby cup, which is sterling, and my father's as well, and a tea set. And I've used, I saw it go by in the chat about using baking soda, baking powder. I've forgotten which one. All I know is it's a box of Arm & Hammer, and I just pour it on, make a paste with a little water. Use gloves because your hands will get black. But you can shine porcelain. you can shine silver, sterling silver, with just that, but all of it comes off onto that powder, which then will come off on your hand. So make sure you're going to do that. You wear gloves. I wouldn't recommend doing that, because someone in the chat did ask about doing that in jewelry. I wouldn't recommend it for jewelry, because the only way to get it all off is to rinse it underwater. And I would be very worried about that powder getting into all the fine little edges of the jewelry. And then, of course, then the water getting down in there. The two together, I think, would be a bad thing for any vintage jewelry. So I would sooner take something like this and take it actually to a jeweler to have them professionally clean it, because one of the things they'll do if they clean it, they'll also check all the settings to make sure they're secure.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's unfortunate that you have the damage to that tiara with the dead stone, but that's probably one of the most valuable visuals that we've shown in
yeah,
episode. Because I wouldn't have, I mean, I would know that it was duller, but I wouldn't have necessarily been able to compare a quote unquote good stone against a dead stone. So to see two identical stones.
And when you're on stage and the audience is 30 or 40 feet away, they're never going to notice that stone. Of course.
But so it's great that you were able to show that, so we can all, you know, learn from that. That if you're, when you're going to clean, it's just it's metallurgy. You get that metal wet, and if it doesn't dry out, it's going to rust or tarnish, and that's what's going to the reflection suddenly isn't there anymore, because it's not crystal that gives its own reflectivity. So well, we've hit our we're a little bit long because we had a little bit of a late start, but that's good. This was great information. Thanks so much for sharing your collection, Nancy.
Can I show one last piece real fast?
Absolutely.
Because there was a question about plastic pieces. This is a piece from Lisner, and it is marked Lisner. Now, all of these specialty little lumps, they're supposed to be leaves, because you have the brown leaves and the gold leaves for fall. And then in between, there are some wonderful deep red and iridescent. They have that lovely iridescent shine to them. There are some wonderful little rhinestones in between. And it has wonderful plating on the back. But all of these molded pieces are hard plastic. They are, they're not completely clear, but they are a colored plastic, but they are plastic, and it's Lisner. So when you get into the 60s, you are going to find some pieces from some of the good makers that might have specialty molded accents to something that is a rhinestone, lovely rhinestone piece bracelet.
That's interesting, because I would not have expected those kinds of things from Lisner, because Lisner is one of the top jewelry makers in vintage jewelry, in my opinion. So that's fantastic.
I think it's because of the fact that those stones actually, and this camera and this phone doesn't do justice to them, that when you see it, you can actually see the vein lines for the leaves when it's up close in person. And I think they did that specifically for this piece, because the fact that you're not going to quite get all those vein lines. And then the fact that it's rippled like a leaf. Dried leaves don't sit flat. And they all have that funny little, just a little bit of a wave to them, and then all the vein lines on them, which they wouldn't, it would have been so cost prohibitive to carve every single one of those as a stone.
Good point. It is a beautiful piece. That's one of the ones that went into the thumbnail of the video. So I'm glad we ended up showing that. So thanks again for joining. We didn't get a chance to do the full introduction since we had the little tech problem at the begining. But Nancy, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your channel and what you've got coming up over the next week?
I have a live sale on Thursday nights. My channel is called This Overstuffed House because in the last 14 years, I have inherited 3 packed estates, including this house. And the house came pretty full. And then I got 2 more full estates after that. So I've been selling on eBay since eBay was 2 years old. But I started after the last inheritance in 2020 hit, I started a channel, and everybody can come on the journey with me, especially any of those who are facing the fact that, you know, when your parents pass away or your grandparents and what do you do with a house full of stuff? I can help with that. You can join me on my journey of clearing it all out. What's behind me, I jokingly refer to as Warehouse 13 because this is the room where most of the boxes are stored. But we're getting there. And if I don't do a live sale on Thursday nights, we do a live unboxing and we take a box and we figure out what's in it. And then we play the guessing game of which estate did this come from. And we have a lot of fun.
So
and what's pretty
11,
amazing. Sorry, Patrick.
I was just going to just clarifying. It's 11 p.m. Eastern, correct?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right.
It's 11 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday nights.
It's a lot of fun to go to the night owl sales because Nancy's so knowledgeable. And what's really fascinating with Nancy is she always knows the lineage and history of where things came from, especially when she's doing a box. And it just is amazing to me. You know, she goes, oh, this belonged to Auntie Floss. And
I
this
just have that weird memory.
I love that, Nancy. It's great.
I've actually had people ask me to write all that stuff down and send it with the item that they bought.
That's always a good tip too. All right. So Katie, also thanks for joining me. So we've got what you're watching tonight is our new format for the DuoDive. So next week's DuoDive will actually be on Katie's channel. So why don't you tell everyone what's coming up and what's in store for our next DuoDive next week?
So I'm very excited about our next DuoDive. We have Vintage Rhinestone husband, Blake, and he's going to be on talking about vintage audio. So I'm very, very excited about that. That's next week. And then we've got some fun things coming up on Sunday with Tales from the Triptych on Nate's channel, which will all be about silver, English silver. So very exciting.
So definitely catch the new programming that we've got scheduled. And of course, tomorrow night on my channel will be my regular live sale. That is at 8 p.m. Eastern on this channel, where I will have my weekly Trusty's Vintage live sale. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us and joining us in the chat, becoming our evening's honorary Huckster hecklers. Thanks again to Nancy for joining us and showing her collection. And I hope everyone had a great time. So thanks everybody
for
for
having me.
your trust and Trusty Huckster, and have a great night. We'll talk to you again later. Bye-bye.
Bye, friends.
Good night.